broadcast live.
Yep, we should be live now.
All right, well, we have about 2 minutes until we go ahead and get started. So for presenters, just a reminder that this is, these sessions are 15 minutes for each of you, and then we'll have hopefully 2 to 3 minutes following each presentation for questions, which I'll moderate from the Q&A and the Zoom chat. Oh, and hopefully you, for the presenters, you saw the order in Sched. So we'll be starting with David and Aaron first, and then Tim, and finishing up with Mark and Danny. All right, I think we are right at time. Sarah, are you ready to start the recording as well?
It should now be started.
Super. All right, everyone, welcome to our first parallel track session in our first full day of Open Repositories. In this session, we'll have a kind of a roundup of community updates from several of our different repository system developers. We'll be hearing from Fedora, DSpace, and Islandora in this session. Before we get started, I want to remind you of the Open Repositories Code of Conduct, and also want to remind you that following this session, immediately following this session, we'll be having a networking session using Wonder. You can find information about that session in Sched. There are also some more detailed directions in the attendee guide on the OR2021 website, which is linked from the Sched event. So please join us for that networking event following this session. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first set of presenters. So we have David Wilcox and Arran Griffith here to give us some updates about Fedora.
Thanks. Yeah, can everyone see my screen okay? Good.
Yep.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, hi, everyone. My name's David Wilcox. I'm the program leader for Fedora at LYRASIS, and joined by my colleague, Arran Griffith, who's the program coordinator. And just wanted to provide a brief update on Fedora in terms of the software and some of the community activities that are going on as we approach the release of Fedora 6.0. So our roadmap for this year is pretty simple. I mean, top of the roadmap is release Fedora 6.0, and in a few minutes I'll kind of share the details on where we currently are with the release schedule. But then along with that, we really want to release very robust migration tooling and documentation to help people using all previous versions of the software and in different environments, whether it's Islandora and Sambera or custom, to be able to move forward to the latest version. And then after that, we don't have a lot planned in terms of core software functionality. I think the focus is largely going to shift to things like adoption and support, making sure that the community can use the tools, helping answer questions, putting on workshops, those sorts of things. And Arran will talk a little bit about that. Then also taking a look at high priority external integration. So sort of the broader ecosystem that Fedora fits into, whether that's Islandora and Samvera, but also some of the other external tools that folks are using that we may want to prioritize for development. So if you haven't been following too closely for Fedora 6.0, there are sort of some top line features that we think are pretty compelling. Number one, I think, is just enhancing the digital preservation support that Fedora provides, largely through adopting a new standard called the Oxford Common File Layout, which I'll talk about in a moment. But we've also done a lot to improve the performance and scale relative to previous versions of the software. We have added a built-in search endpoint. I'll say a little bit more about that later in the presentation. This is primarily for developers and repository administrators to very quickly be able to retrieve content in the repository. And I think really importantly, we've minimized changes to the API. So between version 4 and 5, if you're upgrading to version 6, there shouldn't be a lot of client code changes required. And we've seen that already with Islandora, which has already sort of made the move to from version 5 to version 6 with very little issues, and we're hoping the same will be true with other implementers. And just finally, we've made migrations easier, but we're also anticipating fewer migrations into the future. And again, this comes back to this Oxford Common File Layout, which I mentioned. I've given presentations on this before, and others have as well, so I won't say a ton about it here. But this is a relatively new open standard approach to the layout of preservation persistence. In other words, how you lay out the contents of your repository in a sort of fairly simple file and folder structure with strong notions of versioning and fixity. That's really just in alignment with digital preservation best practices. So this is going to allow us to provide better services around digital preservation, but also, because this is a standard that Fedora is committing to, future versions of the software won't require sort of massive data migrations because they'll continue to comply with the way the content is already laid out on disk. So there's more to be said there, and certainly feel free to reach out if you'd like to know more about the OCFL, or you can just go to the website. It's not a Fedora specific effort. It's one that's been adopted by other implementers, and we're just one of many. In terms of performance and scale, so those of you that are familiar with previous versions of Fedora may know version 4 and 5 were backed by ModeShape, which gave us a lot of benefits, but also ended up causing us a lot of performance and scale issues. So in this latest version, we've completely replaced the backend with a simplified persistence layer that's based on the OCFL. We've also added a configurable database index to make content a little bit faster to retrieve, so you're not constantly pulling from disk. And we've also added support for gathering metrics using tools like Prometheus and Grafana. And we have some scripting and documentation around testing tools like Apache JMeter. So you can stand up a dashboard in your repository and sort of monitor performance and see where the bottlenecks might be. And we've used that to just prove out that Fedora 6 can handle large amounts of content without significant performance issues. As I mentioned, we've also added a built-in search. This is really more for developers and repository admins, but this is built off of the database index, so we're using the same index. And it's not intended to replace a more robust option like Solr or Elasticsearch. Those are still supported as external integrations, but it is built off of this index, which we support several of. Postgres seems to be the most performant in our testing, but we do support MySQL and MariaDB for those that need it. Just in terms of migration tools and support, we've done a lot of work here to try to bring everyone forward. So if you're using a custom implementation, and we think this will also be true for Samvera implementations, at least one community member has already successfully migrated a Samvera application, but of course there are numerous applications in the community, so we do need to do more testing there. But we have done a number of tests with custom implementations, and these tools have proved really valuable. So we have the migration utils for Fedora 3 sort of custom repositories. We also have a validation tool that you can use to make sure that the content you migrated is the same as the source material. But then we also have these import, export, and upgrade utilities if you're running version 4 or version 5. So basically, for any of those previous versions, we have upgrade paths and documentation that you can use. For Islandora, and I'm basing this on the work that we've done so far in a grant that I'll talk about momentarily, we've really found Islandora Workbench to be probably the tool that we would recommend starting with. There are some other tools in the community, but this does seem to be the one that's kind of garnering majority support, and we've certainly invested a lot of time in sort of improving the tool. So that's probably the recommended approach there. But basically, whether you have a custom or a Sambera or an Islandora installation, there are pathways that you can follow to get to the latest version. Just in terms of status, so in December, we released an alpha build, and we followed that by a beta in February. And now, just earlier this month, we cut a release candidate. And along the way, we've been making small but significant improvements to optimizing the performance and scale and resolving a few remaining issues. So we're planning to be in a release candidate phase for a couple of weeks, and then barring any major issues, a full release by late June or early July, which is more or less on track with what we were anticipating earlier this year. So this is really significant news for the community. This represents about 2 years or so worth of design and development work, and is a release that we're quite confident in. In tandem with this, we've been working on a fairly major grant project from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Fedora Migration Paths and Tools project. I'll share a link to these slides in the chat after we're done speaking, if folks want to kind of follow these links. But this has just been focused on Fedora 3 to 6 migrations over an 18-month period. And the main high-level goal here is to bring the community forward to a modern and supported version of Fedora, which, as you can tell from the previous slides, is very much in line with the work that we've already been doing on the core software. So it was very fortunate timing with this grant. We started work in September, and there's been a few kind of steps in the process here. Again, I'll be very brief, but we're working with pilot partners to kind of pilot out a migration scenario, get them to a production instance, and then along the way sort of develop, test, and refine the migration tools. So a lot of the tools I mentioned in that previous slide, there's been a lot of work from the grant, or funded by the grant, that's gone into improving those tools and the documentation associated with them. And we're documenting this process and trying to articulate sort of best practices and lessons learned, and pulling all that into a toolkit, which we're working on now. So we're hoping to have that toolkit, a draft version of it, available within the next couple months, and then we'll iterate on that with the community to produce a production version of that. The grant is intended to culminate with a sort of a dedicated migration training event, which we were originally planning for this fall, but with the COVID situation, we'll most likely have early next year. But we're also producing online training materials to go with this. And of course, none of this would be possible without our members. The grant is one-time funding, but the ongoing operations of the program are really only possible because we have a great community of members that pay annual dues to support staff, support our ability to offer workshops like the one we provided at Open Repositories yesterday, and to build and sustain and support the software, and also to sustain and iterate on the grant products once the grant is complete. So I want to say thank you to all the members that support us. And if you do use Fedora and you're not yet a member, I really urge you to consider advocating for membership at your institution. There's different membership levels depending on your institutional budget. So with that, I want to hand it over to Arran to talk a little bit about what we've got next in terms of the community and some initiatives that we're working on.
Yeah, so thanks, David. I'm Arran. I am the program coordinator here at Fedora. And since I joined in October, my focus really has been generating a structured communications calendar that it touches on a variety of outlets and that has content that's aimed at different levels so that all community members are getting value from what we're sending out. So what this means is that if you join any of our mailing lists or communication outlets, you'll see a link in the next slide to the different ways to get connected, but you can expect the following kind of from us. So we send out a monthly newsletter that recaps and outlines any new developments, both with the software and the community. We send a monthly demo video that we create to help kind of outline and talk about the features, especially with Fedora 6 coming out. And then we also send out links to two blog posts that we put up monthly. So one is an IMLS grant update from David, And the other one's a general interest blog that we send out that's kind of meant just for fun reading. So along with any of our routine communications that we send out each month, coming up in the next few months, weeks, we have some exciting things that we're launching. So obviously with Fedora 6 so close to being released, we are going to be hosting a virtual launch party. So this is really meant to recognize the tech team and the committers and any members who have gone above and beyond to make the achievement possible. And it's going to be a really fun way to bring the community together and just recognize all the work that we've put in this far. The second thing that we have upcoming is we have committed as a community to hosting a workshop at least once a quarter. So typically as a member benefit, we open the registration to members first. We give them first access before making registration publicly available. So at the end of this month, actually, we're hosting a technical workshop that will follow the migration process from Fedora 3 to Fedora 6. The event is free to attend thanks to the IMLS grant. So registration is available via the link in the slides that David's going to share with you, so you can go and do that. And the last thing that we're planning for now is to hold our annual member forums, and something kind of new that we'd like to try is an open information gathering session. So the goal would be of these sessions is to hear from the broader community beyond our members and governance groups about their repository needs to help kind of guide and direct the future of Fedora. So you can look forward to all of those things upcoming. And you can just flip over to the next one there, David. So to get connected, here are some resources, some links that David mentioned. I'm just going to touch on a few really quickly here. The first link is the link to download and test Fedora 6, which, as David mentioned, is in the release candidate phase now. So you can go there and access that. And there is a link to join in the conversations and take advantage of any of the communication pieces that I did just outline above. There's all kinds of ways, mailing lists, Slack, and our newsletter, obviously. And lastly, a link to become a member. If you're not already one, as we said, it's because of our member institutions that we're able to provide such great continued support and continue with the development of Fedora. So with that, I'm going to give it back to David.
Yeah, that's basically it. We'll leave up our contact information here and feel free to reach out to either or both of us if you do have any questions. But I think we'll conclude the presentation there, and I think we perhaps have a few minutes for questions.
Indeed, you do. So, so anyone who has questions, please post them in the Q&A section in Zoom. Okie doke. So we have one question in here. Is Fedora 6 going to be a long-term support version of Fedora?
Yes, we haven't really discussed that officially, but I think it's safe to say that it will be. That is where the kind of community effort will be going into going forward. We don't have a sort of major roadmap of core changes. So there's no, I'm sure there eventually will be a Fedora 7, but we don't have any sort of short to medium term plans yet to sort of do another major update to the software. So yeah, we haven't made that official commitment yet, but I think it's safe to say that Fedora 6 would be a long-term support version.
Right. Any other questions? All right, I'm seeing none. So thank you, David and Arran, for your presentation. And next up, we have Tim Donohue from DSpace to give us an update on what's going on with DSpace 7.
Okay, do you see my slides here?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so before we get started, well, first off, hi all, Tim Donohue at LYRASIS, and I'm the DSpace tech lead. Before we get started, I did want to note that we have an active DSpace 7 Q&A Google Doc down here where you can ask us anything even after this session. So you're welcome to ask questions during the session, but if you're watching this on live stream or recorded later, we started this up yesterday in our workshop, and you're welcome to ask anything there. There's like 60 some questions already. If yours isn't answered yet, ask it and we'll get it answered. But today here, I want to talk to you about DSpace 7.0. And the main question you may be asking already is, when is it coming out? We have a date for you. It's going to be out by August 2nd, possibly even before then if things go perfectly, but we can guarantee that you can go and download it and play around with DSpace 7.0 as of that date. Right now, really, we only have some small things left to do before then. We're fixing up some of the bugs that were reported during our testathon, which started in April, late April, and went into May. During that same time period, we did some accessibility analysis with an external provider. They reported back some basic accessibility issues that we had with the new UI, and we're working on fixing those as well. And we're cleaning up the final documentation. So honestly, if you're wanting to play around with it early, you're more than welcome to, but we don't feel comfortable calling it production ready until we get all those little bugs fixed and the accessibility issues squashed as well. So another question we hear a lot is, why did it take so long? And I wanted to kind of go through some of the background here briefly before showing you some of the highlights of what to expect. I'm not going to go through this slide entirely, but it's worth noting that the discussion around a new user interface for DSpace started way back in 2014. Development started around 2017, although it was very lightweight at that time. Really, we kicked it into gear more around 2018. But the big thing to point out here is in the last year, in 2020 to 2021, we've really kicked it into high gear despite a global pandemic, and we've had 5 beta releases out once every few months to try and really get this release into your hands as soon as possible. And it's also worth noting that this is by far the most massive release we've ever done in DSpace history, with over 1 million lines of code changed. And you can see the scale compared to other major releases here that we've had. So this is bigger than the last 4, even 5 releases combined, all the effort that has gone into DSpace 7. So this is really what we're talking about and why it's taken so long here to get this into your hands. But we're super excited for you all to get to play with it. And this is sort of the development progress that we made per year. So in 2020, we also began funded development, which helped us kick it into full gear despite that pandemic year that we've all gone through here. We were able to do fundraising around DSpace 7, and many of you, your institutions, helped contribute to that, that development and kicking it into gear. And while that may not be like a huge uptick here in 2020 to 2021, it is worth noting that, again, pandemic year and all that sort of craziness going on, it's pretty major accomplishment to kind of keep things going and even speed things up during that timeline and get out those 5 releases over that last year's period. So I want to go through a little bit of what is in DSpace 7.0 here, and so that you get a sense of what all's here. You may have seen some of this in the workshop yesterday if you attended it, but for those who are watching this for the first time, there's some new information here for you as well. As you may have heard, and as I've already alluded to, we've got a brand new user interface, lots of features redesigned there, enhanced user privacy to better align with GDPR. We've also taken some of the old command line tools that you had to run back on command line and brought them into the admin user interface into a new processes section. There's some embedded video, basic embedded video player there. All of these features that are in the UI are in our REST APIs. It's fully enabled from that REST API layer as well. In fact, you could even run it headless if you really wanted to. And there's support for OpenAir 4, along with configurable entities, which I'll touch on briefly. All of this built on the same sort of backend or framework that DSpace 6 had. And at a high level, this is sort of what we're talking about here. We have that backend. I'm not going to go into everything here, but that backend tools and functionality is very similar in nature to DSpace 6, with still having Solr, a database, your files on the file system. The front end is the thing that's completely and totally new there, built on Angular with Bootstrap styling, running Node.js to allow for things like search engine optimization. And it is worth noting here that we had a couple design goals that we brought through this entire development process. So that front end, we've made themable by a Bootstrap designer. And what we mean by that is that we want you to be able to theme this easily. We want you to be able to just hire somebody who knows Bootstrap and some basic HTML, and they can get away with doing quite a bit of the theming for you right in that DSpace user interface without needing to know much about Angular at all. We're also striving for that accessibility alignment. The backend is streamlined into a single web application, which is a little bit easier to resource and easier to install and configure. And that backend also really has security and stability in mind these days. So we know everybody wants your data out there, but you want it safe. That backend has security protections built in, so we require HTTPS for production scenarios. We have CORS, headers, and CSRF protection. The backend also has to trust the clients that it's using, so it only trusts your user interface by default, but you can enable it to trust other clients if you want to use that backend in other ways. And everything we've built in DSpace 7 has been using test-driven development, so we can find and squash those bugs early, whether they're on the UI or on that backend. And this is one of the other questions that I get all the time is, how do I upgrade? Can I upgrade? What's that all look like? The quick answer here is that yes, you can upgrade from any old version of DSpace to DSpace 7. Your data is safe and will upgrade automatically when you install that backend on top of it. The front end, though, it is worth noting, this is the one area that will be a migration for everyone. You must install that brand new user interface. We think you're going to love it, though, and we think you're going to like the experience there a lot better than those old user interfaces. So I'm going to highlight a couple quick features here. I'm going to move slightly quickly just because I only have 15 minutes here, but this is some of the stuff we're really excited about getting to show you or have you experience. First off, search is available everywhere in the application. Things you couldn't search before, you can now search. So things like your in-progress submissions, your workflows, admin-only search, even searching across entity relationships, all of that's available throughout the application, and all of that's also available within the header. The submission process is also streamlined as well as workflow approval. So we have a one-page submission form with sections that give you status markers of how far along you are. You can do drag and drop from most anywhere. You can autofill a lot of your submission fields by uploading any of these files of these various formats. And you can search through all your past submissions in that workflow process to be able to quickly find what you were last working on. And I have a very quick demo of what that all means here of pulling in a PubMed XML file to show that once you pull in that file and select what collection you're submitting into, your submission form gets auto-populated with the metadata that came from that PubMed file. And it allows you to streamline your submission process so you can just upload whatever files are related to that to complete it right away. On the admin side, there are some additional powers available to your administrators. We have a sidebar that's available there that's global and allows you to do tasks from wherever you are within the application, including creating, editing content from anywhere. There are those processes that we brought from the command line, which I'll show briefly here as well. And you also have the power to see all the workflows that are in progress and administer them as an admin. And this is just a very basic, it jumped midway through here, it looks like. This is showing some of the processes here that are available from the command line processes that you can kick off and actually monitor from within this processes overview in the admin UI. Some of these also have easy ways to kick them off through other tools in the admin side. So when you're kicking off a CSV export, you can do that through a streamlined export option. But what it does behind the scenes is kick off these processes and run them for you automatically. As I mentioned, your data is totally open for integrations. All the features are in that REST API built with best practices in mind, browsable by humans or machines, every endpoint documented in a REST contract, and you have that safety and stability that you can decide which clients you want to trust. So while anybody can read your metadata there that's public, they can't all log in unless you actually trust that client that's coming to you. And your users have more privacy, more alignment with GDPR. You have user agreements and privacy statements customizable out of the box. You've got user cookie preferences. You can delete any account quickly and easily through the DSpace admin UI. And briefly, you may have heard a little bit about configurable entities. There's a session on this later in the conference, but at a brief level, entity is a new sort of object within DSpace. It's an item that has a specific type or label on it, and you can relate it then to other entities or items. They're totally optional, but completely configurable as well. But we do have a couple basic models out of the box within DSpace 7 that you can choose to enable if you wish. So you can have a journal hierarchy model where you have journal entities related to their volumes and issues and articles. You can also have a basic model relating to author profiles or research, where you can relate the authors to all their publications and any projects and org units they may be a member of. And this is a very basic brief demo here of actually searching for an author within the system and being able to filter by that entity type, by that person entity type, get to their author profile page and be able to see everything that they're linked to within the system, search within it, find common authors, things of that nature. All of this is enabled within entities. There's much more on entities and enhanced submission and workflow coming on Thursday. So I'd recommend either watching these live or watch the recording after the fact if you want to learn a little bit more about those areas. And I mentioned that we had extra fundraising for DSpace 7. So these are the folks that we really want to thank around providing us some extra funds to kickstart that development and really push it into high gear in 2020 and 2021. And also a huge thanks goes out to Atmire, my own colleagues at LYRASIS and For Science. Those are the three main developers of a lot of what you're seeing here today and we'll see throughout the conference. And it is worth mentioning, we do have a plan for what's coming next after 7.0. 7.0 does not include all of the features of 6.0 or 6.3 or any of those 6.x releases, but those are coming. And we're planning those out in a stage 7.x release plan. So we're looking at adding all those missing features of our several smaller releases. And we prioritize them on a wiki page, which is linked to here. You can see that in the slides, which I'll share after this talk. And the goal here is to try and get those highly prioritized features in your hands as soon as possible to encourage everybody to upgrade. And we're trying to really do this in the same sort of way that we did that beta release structure. So we had 5 betas within a year. We'd love to be able to do 4 or 5 of these releases within a year to get these highly prioritized features in your hands as soon as possible. And that schedule will be coming out as soon as 7.0 is out the door as well. We do have other ways you can contribute. I'm going to just skip through this to save some time here, but you're welcome to join our development team meetings every Thursday if you're interested in the development model or helping us review code or get things in. And there's other meetings as well. We also, like the Fedora team, have many members that help us make DSpace happen. And these are just our general members that support us year in and year out. All our platinum, silver, and gold members, as well as our bronze and copper members. And we'd love to get more institutions helping to support us and make DSpace better for everybody through membership. And they're the ones that really support my role and a lot of the work that LYRASIS is able to do here. So you can try it out yourself on the demo site right away. You can also quickly run it via Docker, and there's a quick install and run process via Docker there that you can use. And last but not least, I'm done with this in terms of looking forward to your questions. The slides are available at this tiny URL right here, and I'll copy it into the chat right after I'm done here. The public Google Doc there is bolded in the middle, and the slides for our workshop are also available from yesterday. And we will be around in the networking sessions coming up where it aligns with our schedule. So you can find myself, the Atmire team, the For Science team, if you want to ask some more one-on-one questions within those sessions.
All right, thanks so much, Tim. So we do have a couple of questions, and we'll start out with the one that's in the Q&A. So in DSpace 7, have there been improvements or enhancements to author authority and or disambiguation? There are some related questions in the doc about ORCID integration and authority file as well. So is that something that you can share more about?
So a little bit, yes. It's a little complex to describe quickly, but we do have some author authority capabilities built into the new configurable entities to be able to track things like your ORCID in that new person entity model and be able to actually import new entities from ORCID to create them within DSpace and allow you to actually even define your preferred name within that, all that sort of stuff. So there's a little bit in that entities layer. We also do support the old manner of authority authority. There's an older authority framework that was in DSpace 5, 6, and 6 that we support some basic authority mechanisms as well, but I'll have to link you to those probably in the Google Doc is best. But that's kind of the very quick summary. There's not a whole lot new there other than the entity side of things.
Right, and as I understand it, that's kind of a way to lay the groundwork for future
Correct.
developments in
Yeah.
that area.
So we're introducing entities in 7.0. There will be many enhancements to that model in coming 7.x releases and beyond. And we are hoping to be able to have tighter integration with things like ORCID and other persistent identifiers, sort of APIs out there to be able to create entities and sync entities and things of that nature.
Excellent, thank you. So from the chat, will the new DSpace interface allow for automatic citation creation?
Automatic citation creation. I'm assuming you want like a Chicago style citation or things of that nature. Right now, that's not in the DSpace 7 interface, but I think that that could be something that could be generated more dynamically. So I would recommend they submit a feature request to GitHub issues where we're tracking things these days, and we can see where we can try and slot that in along the way. So a lot of that information is captured by DSpace, but not necessarily displayed in the UI yet.
Okay, other questions? I see that there are a couple of new ones in the questions doc, although there are a heap load of answered questions. What Java versions are supported and what are your plans for going forward? That's a tricky question, so I'll let you take that.
With Java, we are up to Java 10 now. And we do require Java 10 in order to upgrade. So you cannot run 8 or 7, which 7 I know is end of life. I think 8 has become end of life as of 2020. But we're on Java 10. We try and stay on LTS versions as much as possible. And the plans for the future is just to stay on LTS versions, both for Java and for Angular as well.
A related question that I thought was interesting that came up yesterday was about running semi-related embedded Tomcat. That might.
So we are looking at an option to be able to run the backend with an embedded Tomcat, because the backend now runs on Spring Boot, which allows an option to enable embedded Tomcat. So you can just kind of double click it and it runs. That's not enabled right now in DSpace 7.0, but I think it is definitely possible. So I think that may be coming down the line. At least I would hope it would be coming down the line. It's something I'm interested in as well, but I don't have an exact timeline for when that would happen. But folks are welcome to start to play with it. If you figure out a way to make it happen, send it my way, and I would love to get it out to everybody.
Great. So one more question in the Q&A. Any plans for OCFL support in the future?
Good question. That has not come up much in the DSpace community yet, but I will mention that in terms of like the file system structure that I've seen out of OCFL, there's a lot of similarities with how the DSpace asset store works and has worked in terms of laying out files within your file system. So I think there are commonalities there that we could start to look at how to make that happen in a future version of DSpace. But it's not yet definitively on the roadmap because we're trying to first get all those DSpace 6 features ported over to DSpace 7 and get those out the door to people.
Great. And one final question, quick, in the last minute we have for you, future IIIF integration plans.
Oh, IIIF, yes. We actually have a developer who's been working on that with DSpace 7 in mind. So there's some pull requests that are out there related to adding IIIF support both to the back end and the front end to make it work properly between the two. So that work has started with one developer, but I know he's looking for more people to test and help out with that. It is not yet in 7.0, but the team has been interested in that work that he's been doing. And so we're going to start to look at that as we're planning out 7.1 and 7.2 to see if we can try and help that effort along. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend getting in touch on the IIIF channel in the DSpace Slack. And I can also send you more information.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions right now. But just as a reminder, there is the questions doc, so please continue to add your questions there.
Thanks all.
Great. All right, so finally in the session, we have an Islandora community update with Mark Jordan and Danny Lamb. So take it away.
Thank you. Everybody, nice to be here with you today. I am co-presenting today with Danny Lamb, who is the tech lead from the Islandora Foundation. I am Mark Jordan, Associate Dean of Libraries for Digital Strategy at Fraser University. So just a review for many people, Islandora is a general repository platform. It can be used in a variety of applications, ranging from institutional repositories to general digital cultural heritage collections and specialized collections. And this is just a list of some of Islandora's features that make it relevant to those use cases. The last two in the list, advanced and faceted searching and Docker deployment, are fairly new and based on community feedback. And Danny is going to talk in detail about the Docker deployment in the second half of this presentation. Focusing for a bit on the Islandora community. Of course, community is much more than numbers, but looked at from that perspective, we have about 320 instances out in the wild of Islandora, running two major versions, mainly Islandora 7 and more Islandora 8. And I'll showcase a half dozen or so of those Islandora 8 sites in a few minutes. Islandora 8 will become known as Islandora 2.0 very soon. We have a fairly active email list, well, more active Slack channels these days. The email list is really reserved for announcements these days. We have 34 Islandora Foundation members. These are our institutions who fund the Islandora Foundation and fund the staff members' salaries. We have a thriving vendor community of 5 vendors who are members of the Islandora Foundation, and thriving interest groups, some on hiatus and not so active, some very active, and I'll talk about a couple of those in a few minutes. Just a map showing spattering of some of the instances that we know about. As you can see, heavily North America, heavily Europe, and less well represented in other parts of the world at the moment. So to focus for a minute on a couple of, or half dozen Islandora 8 instances in the wild. The first one is Kent State University. This is their institutional repository called OAKS. This is their homepage. One of the interesting features that OAKS has is that it manages journals. And this is an example of one of those journals. As you can see, it has issue list. If I had screen captured more of this, you could scroll down and see a table of contents for this particular issue. By the way, OAKS was probably, I think, the first live Islandora 8 instance to go live. This is the herbarium from University of Prince Edward Island. It documents flora species on the island. And an interesting feature of the herbarium is this graph view. This is not a standard feature of Islandora 8, but this is something specific to this repository, but it does demonstrate some of Islandora 8's linked data capabilities. A couple of sites now from New Zealand. This one is Canterbury Stories, a website of the repository of the Christchurch City Libraries. This is not their homepage. This is a brief listing of some exhibits that they've put together. And this is one of those exhibits. As you can see, table of contents, again, not shown here in this top half of the page screen snapshot, but some rich media embedded in this exhibit. This is the second one from New Zealand that I'll showcase. It's Archives Central, group of archives in the central North Island. And this is interesting because, as you can see along the menu at the top, agents, series, records. This is an example of an Islandora 8 site that demonstrates quite well highly hierarchical information. This is archival descriptions. So this interface lets you drill down through accessions, series, and records. I happen to have screen captured the agents listing here, but you get the idea of how you can navigate down into the hierarchy effectively using this kind of interface. This one is from Arizona State University. It's called PRISM. It's their general digital collections platform. They also are about to launch an institutional repository based on Islandora 8, which is to showcase their kind of collections list, showcasing collections this way. Final one I'll showcase is LADI, the Latin American Digital Initiatives Archive repository from University of Texas at Austin. It's a multilingual variety of kinds of content in this. And one of the remarkable features of this site is a highly sophisticated advanced search interface. They did this work before advanced search became kind of part of the mainstream Islandora 8 code base. So they've forged ahead and done this on their own. But as you can see, it's fielded. You can choose various fields and sort attributes, and has many other Solr-based sites is highly faceted. So shifting from some Islandora 8 showcase sites back to the community a little bit. The previous year, we saw a couple of community-driven sprints. For example, these are coming from interest groups mainly. So the metadata interest group is just finishing up some work on defining and refining a default metadata profile for Islandora 8. The Islandora documentation interest group is also just wrapping up a sprint to update the documentation to match some of the new features and functionalities in the Islandora 8 release that's about to come out, which Daniel will talk about in a few minutes. And the last one, Drupal 9 support, this is not from an interest group. This is just a group of motivated committers and community developers who got together in a short amount of time to solve a problem that is specific to Drupal. And I won't go into details here about it, but it basically to bring the Islandora code base and integrations up to the most recent and most robust version of Drupal, Drupal 9. This group of committers got together and just did that pretty quickly without the formal structure of a sprint or an interest group, which was quite an interesting thing to watch. A few other community updates. At the end of 2020, the Islandora Foundation deployed a feature priority survey to the community. And from that, much of the development and the current Islandora release has come. It was very good to see the community pitching in to tell the core developers what features were important to them and which ones were not so important. The documentation interest group was one of those interest groups that kind of went into a little bit of hiatus for a while. It is now back in full force. As I mentioned a minute ago, they're just wrapping up their own community-driven sprint to bring the documentation up to the about to be released version of Islandora. And we now have a couple of new regular meetings. We have had a weekly technical call for quite some time, a few years. But now we have two new calls, a users call and an open meeting. These are both monthly meetings. And the users call is kind of a counterpoint to the tech call, which is mainly developers and integrators. And the open meeting is a chance for, it's kind of like Islandora Foundation office hours. It's a chance for people to come and just chat, or for people to come and showcase things they're working on. One of the most significant changes in the community in the last year happened at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, and that was a restructuring of the Islandora Foundation governance. The key new thing here is the addition of a leadership group, which is sort of modeled after the Fedora leadership group. Prior to this, the board of directors was large, had about 12, 13 people on it, representing partner level Islandora Foundation supporters. After this change, that group is now the leadership group, and they are tasked with defining strategic vision for the Islandora Foundation. The board of directors is much smaller, 4 people, and their scope is limited to board stuff, financial and legal mainly. But we have other parts of the Islandora community, or the Islandora community governance structure, which are active and super important. The coordinating committee is the operational group within the Islandora Foundation, and they do important things like manage community contributions, both in code, documentation, and so forth, and also plan events and also draft policies, like the code of conduct, for example. We have a technical advisory group, which does what it says on the label. It advises Danny, the tech lead, on important questions. We have a core group of developers who are responsible for ensuring quality in the code base. And we have, as I said earlier, a thriving set of interest groups who are communities of practice around things like digital preservation, metadata, institutional repositories, things of that nature. And like David and Tim, I want to thank all those institutions who have supported us over the years. This is a fairly up-to-date representation of those institutions. So I thank you very much for supporting the Islandora Foundation and the work we do. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danny Lamb.
Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about what's coming up in the latest release of Islandora. So I guess one of the big obvious things you'll notice is that our branding has changed ever so slightly. So before we had our previous major version was Islandora 7. This is Islandora 8. We released, it was Islandora 8 version 1.0.0. So we wanted to have semantic versioning, but then also keep, you know, the Drupal major version kind of in the name. Now that we're on Drupal 8 or 9, that sort of no longer makes sense. We don't want to be Islandora, you know, 8/9 version something or other. So we just dropped the numbers. So we are now just Islandora and version 2.0.0, even though this is the third release of what was previously known as Islandora 8. So maybe that's a little confusing, but hopefully from here on out, it's all smooth sailing because we are actually on true, legit semantic versioning. So anyway, next slide, please. Sorry, Mark, can you bump the slide for me? All right, thank you, sorry. All right, so there's a lot of new features coming up. These are the major highlights, the heavy hitters. So we mentioned before, we are compatible with Drupal 8 and 9. It will work for either. We strongly suggest you move to 9 as soon as you can because you should always, always, always keep up on Drupal and have the latest. It's the most secure. But we are committed to supporting both 8 and 9 until 8 reaches end of life. We also developed an advanced search module. This was something from Islandora 7 that we had that everyone used and loved and was sorely missing from Islandora 8. You have a lot of improvements of search and indexing in Islandora 8 in general. And so then this just brings us right back up to feature parity. So you can do your typical Boolean type searches and choose your fields and stuff like that. So you can really control and hone in on your searches with that. And I'll just say it is, although it's bundled up with the Islandora module right now, there is absolutely nothing Islandora specific about it. It was built as truly just a Drupal advanced search module. And so really the only requirement is that you're using Solr on your Drupal site. And so this actually is something that will appeal to a lot of people out there, not necessarily just within the Islandora space. We also added audio and video transcriptions, VTT files it will accept, and this will actually work with several different viewers out there. So if you want to just work with the HTML5 stuff you get by default, we've dropped in some JavaScript that will actually play these transcripts underneath the viewer for you. But if you use a more sophisticated solution like Video.js or the Able player, which is actually a wonderful player that's got a module for Drupal, it's very accessible. If you use these, for the most part, you can kind of just configure the modules correctly and it will find the VTT files and it will work as expected. So this sort of adds another content type to what Islandora 8 can provide compared to what 7 did. So this essentially is the new version of what was oral histories in Islandora 7. And just in general, this was a big asked for feature. And we're really grateful to have this just kind of come out of thin air from a community contribution. The other main thing that we are adding here that I think is just kind of like a quality of life type improvement when you're using the software is a batch upload. So we have several different tools for doing large migrations. There's the Islandora Workbench tool that David Wilcox mentioned that Mark actually wrote. And you can certainly use that for doing a full-blown migration and getting all of your content in. But if you just want to upload these 5 things, that's what this batch uploader is for. So now you can just kind of drag your original files and drop them in an upload widget, and it will do all of the work of sniffing out what sort of entities it should create all of the entities, and then wire them all together with all of the relationships for you. So it saves you a boatload of clicks, basically. And it meets this nice kind of middle ground that we used to have in Islandora 7 with the zip batch uploader. And so this also sort of essentially replaces that, but it's very streamlined experience. Just kind of drop your files in and then they're in your repository. It's pretty nice. So that's the major software features that I wanted to talk about. But Mark, if you'll click on the next slide, I'll talk. This is another huge part of this upcoming release, which is Isle. This is our Dockerized Islandora. The Isle project itself has been around for a while now. It started out as a grant-funded project, Mellon grant-funded initiative, actually, for Islandora 7. In Islandora 8, it kind of came out of its silo from that grant-funded project and came under the control of the Islandora Foundation, and it was developed entirely out in the open through our open processes and everything. We kind of just took it under our umbrella, so to speak. And so now this is a very wonderful, fast, and standardized way to install Islandora, which is, quite frankly, one of the trickier bits of the entire stack. There's the needs of the users and the needs of developers that we're trying to meet. This meets the needs of the sysadmins that are tasked with deploying large repository infrastructure, because it's not just like we do one thing. We are integrating and gluing many bits and pieces of things together. And so from a sysadmin point of view, it's kind of a lot of work. And so this really cuts down the time it's going to take for you to go live with your Islandora repository. I guess, can you click on the next slide, please, Mark? So here's my elevator pitch for Isle, which is, here's the advantages of it. Basically, first and foremost, it's faster. We used to have installation methods with Ansible. We had some bash scripts just hanging out before that. All of those took anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to run, to provision an environment. With Isle, once you download the initial images, which is, if your internet connection is decent, it's a couple of minutes. Then it's really only just a couple more minutes until you have your Islandora installation. So a typical install with the full download of all the images is usually less than 10 minutes. And for developers who are changing things or iterating things to deploy your changes, now making a small change doesn't lead to another 30-minute to an hour wait. It actually just leads to another minute or two max. So in terms of developer productivity, DevOps productivity, it's astronomical. The benefits are just crazy. It's definitely very easy to use. It's much easier to understand and figure out compared to our Ansible playbook or bespoke bash scripts. There's really only one configuration file you need to play with. It doesn't have a ton of entries in it. A lot of the moving parts are all hidden from you, which is really great. And so when you're focusing on maintaining and running your Islandora repository, now you're really just kind of hyper-focused on maintaining and running your Drupal site, and sort of all of the rest of it is taken care of for you. So it just really lowers the barrier to entry. You really only have to figure out how to deploy and maintain a Drupal site, which is a challenge in and of itself, but at least it's the only challenge that you're really facing compared to many of the other things that you have to do. And then lastly, it's shared. And so all those details are hidden because the community is maintaining and developing all of these other parts of it for you. And so you don't have to worry about it. If you want to get the latest changes, you just use Docker and you pull them in, and the community does that for you. I realize I'm running out of time here. I'm going to burn through these last slides. So I'm just going to burn through this real fast. So all of our images for Isle are available on Dockerhub. You can get them. There's an Islandora organization there. You can see them. Anytime we tag a release, they get tagged with a named release, but all commits are tagged and pushed up to Dockerhub using their commit hash. So you can literally find and locate at any point in time of the project's history, a working environment. And just real quick, ISLE also provides a lot of tools for using Docker Compose to actually deploy and run the orchestration. It generates the configuration for you. We got a lot of stuff if you want to back up and restore kind of these basic maintenance tasks. We have a lot of convenience functions for that. And so we do also support taking a site from looking at a demo to pulling it down and making it your own so that you can customize it and develop on it. And then also taking all of that and wrapping it up and deploying it onto a production site. So we've got the tools for sort of using Docker to do all these things, these kind of sysadmin workflows, if you will. So that's it. I'll leave it at that. I got 2 links down here. One's to our website, islandora.ca, and then the other one is where you can go get ISLE. So if you are interested in trying out Islandora, basically clone that down using Git and type make demo, and you've got an Islandora. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so one quick question specific to ISLE. Is it always up to date with the baseline Islandora, or does it have to catch up? Or the versions in sync? Can I always find an ISLE container that's got the latest?
So yeah, every time we push, it's got the latest commit hash. We are very careful to avoid using the latest tag because that can get you in a lot of trouble because things won't necessarily line up. But if you look at ISLE, it's built with a different GitHub repo, but you can go and literally every commit in that repository, it's available up there for you to use. So you can always find the latest. But the thing to understand is that your Drupal site, we're not really maintaining. So you've got this Drupal site and you're updating it kind of out of sync with the rest of the other stuff. Really what you're getting is the rest of all the repository infrastructure, like the stuff to generate your image derivatives and, you know, your ActiveMQ queue and Tomcat running FC repo and that sort of stuff. So that stuff, it's very easy to always get the latest. But then if you want like the latest Drupal 9, then that's up to you to actually run the composer command to get it.
Great, thanks. This last question in the Q&A is really for all of the presenters. For all of you, do any of you support 3D models in terms of either storage or viewing them in the UI?
I can say for us, not explicitly. I know that there are some modules in Drupal that will work with 3D modeling, but we have not integrated any of them formally into the software yet.
And for the DSpace side of things, I can say that we can store pretty much any file you give us, but we don't have any way to render or view the 3D models at this time.
I unfortunately cannot answer for Fedora. David, I see, has stepped out. He had a conflict at the top of the hour. So I can get back to anybody about that, though.
You can store it. I'll say you can store it. You can also store it in Islandora. We just can't do anything with it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much to all of our presenters for this great session. Next up, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we do have our very first of our 3 networking sessions. I'm pasting the link to the SCED event there, and that is happening over in a different platform in wonder.me. There are some the link and some instructions linked in that SCED event. So you can go and chat with our generous sponsors and also meet up with your colleagues, including possibly presenters from this session if you have more questions.
I hope everyone will join us there.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you in the networking session.